Hello? Hello, hello?
Yes, Erik hocam, we are hearing you.
Okay, very good. I'm uncertain about my sound here. But it seems to work.
It seems working, yeah.
Okay, very good, very good.
No problem. We will start in like 1-2 minutes, inshallah.
Okay.
Anas hocam?
Yes, Wahabuddin hocam.
How can we see our own faces? We can see or no?
We will, inshallah, yeah. We will start our video in 1 minute.
Okay. So it is with you. The control is with you.
Yes.
Okay. Then I was worried what happens, because when we enter, usually we see our faces.
Yeah. We will open the camera, turn on the cameras, inshallah.
So the object is to break Heba's 100 participant limit, yeah?
111.
111. Can we get that far? I wonder. Probably not.
What we do is, Prof, we just multiply.
We can invite a lot of right-wing trolls from the internet to boost our numbers.
That's what we can do. At the moment, we have 19.
Well, the students are often late, I've noticed.
Yeah. Now 20.
Okay, very good.
Anas hocam?
Yes, Wahabuddin hocam, I am listening.
There are some people, they just show that admit. Who is controlling that?
We are controlling, yeah. So is there a problem with this right now? No, right?
No.
Okay. Yes, here we go.
Okay, very good.
Talha hocam, should we get started? Talha hocam, can you hear me? Erik hocam, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yes, Wahabuddin hocam, you hear me, right?
Yeah, I can.
And Heba hocam, you can hear me, so? Talha hocam, can you hear me? I don't think so.
I think Talha hocam cannot hear.
Yeah, he doesn't hear right now.
Point to him.
Oh, Heba. Hi, Heba.
Hi.
We are trying to solve the...
Can you put on your mic, Talha hocam?
Yeah, he doesn't hear us right now, but we will solve it right now, inshallah. He will log in again. Log out and log in. This is the most efficient way to solve technical problems, right?
Enes, you're such a good talk show host.
Really? Thank you very much.
Yeah, you could have a second career there on TV.
I mean, I am happy with the current career, but let's keep things in mind.
Keep the current one rather than go to the new one.
It's a very important skill to listen to people.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
It's a very uncommon skill, actually.
I mean, if we have guests like you to listen, then it's very easy to listen. As soon as we get Talha Hocam. Talha Hocam, can you hear us now? Would it be possible maybe try the earphones, headphones?
No.
Hello.
Alo.
Yeah, Talha Hocam. Now we
Şimdi
can
alıyor
hear
musun?
you.
Ha.
Okay, very nice.
Okay. All right. Great.
Alhamdulillah, we solved the problem. Okay, should we get started?
Okay.
Yes, please. Yeah,
Okay,
I
yes,
mean,
okay.
it's now.
Okay, let's begin then. First of all, good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to tonight's event on world politics and coronavirus. As we all observe, the world is going through difficult days in the last few months because of the pandemic, and the number of those who have been infected with the virus has exceeded 2 million people globally. Definitely the immediate and most important effect of the virus is on the health of individuals and millions of people. Nevertheless, directly or indirectly, the pandemic has consequences for various aspects of life, such as economics, politics, diplomacy. So today, this event will focus on the effects of coronavirus on politics and international relations, mainly. We have distinguished speakers, the faculty members of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Ibn Khaldun University. I would like to welcome them as well, Professor Talha Köse, Erik Ringmar, Heba, Raouf, and Wahabuddin Raess. Our panelists will discuss different aspects of this situation that we are going through. Each speaker will have 5 to 6 minutes of talk. So these are like brief talks on specific questions. And then we will have an open forum and Q&A session. Before we get started, I would like to ask everybody to use the chat section on Zoom to write their questions directly to me so that I can refer them to our panelists at the end of their talks. So I would like to begin with Dr. Talha Köse. Talha Hocam, many experts of international relations make certain predictions about possible impacts of the virus on international security. Do you think it is an overreaction? Will the pandemic have an influence on international peace and security? And what will be the consequences globally as well as regionally? What do you think about this question?
I would like to thank our department for organizing this event. We have read lots of reviews, lots of comments on this problem. So some of them are really quite pessimistic, and we will, never turn back to the life we got used to. I think we have to recognize that this is a huge, drastic change in world politics, world history. So it's a significant event. And we have to also recognize the fact that there are lots of uncertainties, lots of changes, and those uncertainties and changes, if they are properly managed, can be can reduce the risk of the conflict. And if they are not managed well, I think this may turn into a huge chaotic situation. So I see in the both side of the situation, I think the management of the crisis is very important, and I don't see any kind of cooperation and common understanding, shared understanding on this. However, the main impact of this coronavirus crisis, I think, is it will accelerate the change. Rather than creating a complete new situation, there are already certain trends in world history and world politics. For instance, there is a power transition from West Europe, America to Asia. So I think this process is likely to accelerate this power transition. Secondly, there's an increasing income gap and inequality, especially in the Western countries and the rest of the world. I think this crisis will also increase further increase this income gap and inequality. Also, there was a decline in the trust in the institutions, international institutions and domestic institutions. So, for instance, United Nations, European Union, and World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, and domestically the institutions that were supposed to do the health issues, education. So I think this process, this coronavirus, will also increase the decline in the trust in the institutions. There is also, in connection with the income inequality and gap, there was also polarization between different segments of the societies. So from ethnic, sectarian, and even the class level polarization. I think this crisis, although is a shared crisis, but the response to this crisis probably may accelerate the polarization. So lots of people, all segments of the societies will be influenced. However, the response will be different. There is also, especially in the West, aging, problem of aging and insufficient services. And this problem and also declining competitiveness in the West. So I think this problem will also increase the impact of, aging, and this will probably make them less competitive internationally in terms of trade. So these are significant problems. And I think most important thing, if you look at the conflicts in the post-World War II period, starting from the 1945, most of the conflicts happened in the periphery. So although there was a Cold War system, some kind of stability, most violent conflicts happened in the peripheries, in Africa, in the Middle East, in other parts, and there were proxy conflicts. So it is likely that with this transformation, the Europe, the center of the world economy and politics, may also face real conflicts, real violent conflicts. The other thing is that I think the increasing complexity and the multi-layer aspect of this coronavirus, crisis is threatening, and I think there's a huge problem there. So there's economic aspect, increasing unemployment, increasing, decline in productivity, decline in world trade. So this will, I think, affect eventually the political aspect, and this will also eventually polarize the people all over the world. So culturally, economically, it's a very complicated conflict, unlike the previous conflicts or previous crises we have experienced in the post-World War II era. So there is also different, industries, individuals, the companies and states will be affected. So in that sense, it's a multi-layer issue. So the other thing is that the world powers, especially Europe, US, are not prepared to handle this crisis. That's what we see. So they were much vulnerable to this issue in terms of health, in terms of employment. I think that was a very important transformation. That was important change in the minds of the people. So they will recognize that we are not as powerful as they seem. And also the basis of the stability, especially in the global West, and was that there was a consensus between the states, people, societies, and the markets. I think this consensus will be affected very negatively, so which will make everything much more complicated. So this at least at the center, there was some consensus. I think this coronavirus situation will accelerate the decline of this consensus. What is making this problem even more difficult to handle? So the sources of pessimism is that, there is a decline of cooperation between international actors. There is decline of leadership. So as you see in 2008 global financial crisis, there was leadership in the US, in Germany take important roles. We don't see similar role in Trump administration. They focus on America. In Europe, we see lack of leadership, and there's also leadership problem in China that it's a question. So I think there is also decline in the trust in international institutions, which are regulating bodies of the conflicts. So international trade also reduces the conflicts. So with this transformation, with the coronavirus, I think there will be a decline in international trade, which also will impact reducing conflict, reducing impact of the trade. I think that's also a significant issue. And, all these transformation also, there is a shifting power balance between, so as we say it, from West to, Asia. This will also affect, it usually generates the conflict. So if you look at the picture, there is a period of uncertainty and change, and the coronavirus crisis will accelerate this change, and we don't really have sufficient mechanisms, institutions to address this problem. This is the huge change, and also shifting the conflict and tensions from periphery to center. I think this is the major change.
Okay, thank you very much, Talha Hocam. These are really important points, but I don't know whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic about, because the picture you draw includes like no cooperation, no leadership, decline of consensus, increase of inequality. These are also, I mean, the things we may say when we talk about a global political and economic crisis, right? I mean, these are the features almost, yes, or the preconditions for such a crisis. So as far as I understood, you are predicting not a really optimistic scenario about upcoming years. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I give two examples. I mean, two major crises of the post-World War II. So 9/11 attacks, so that was a huge systemic crisis, and also a 2008 financial crisis. So one of them is managed really terribly. So the global war on terror was mistaken. There was no consensus, and the wrong targets. So this cooperation, common understanding had, ended very easily, and it left behind a huge mess. Whereas in 2008 global financial crisis, the G20 mechanisms, the cooperation between international actors and common understanding and shared interest, I think there is a good crisis management. So it was a systemic crisis, not like this one. I mean, it was much smaller in terms of its content, because right now it is much more complicated, but at least there was some kind of cooperation and common understanding, which gives us a hope. So I think any crisis can be managed. We cannot go back to a pre-coronavirus period, but the post-coronavirus period can be managed in a better way, or there may be fragmentation in all aspects.
Okay, thank you very much, Talha Hocam. I would like to continue with Professor Erik Ringmar. Erik Hocam, one of the discussions around the pandemic is about its effects on globalization. So when faced with a risk to the health and security of their nations, the states are taking some precautions to deal with the disease, but this may lead to a new phase of isolation, some commentators say. The flow of goods and humans has decreased considerably globally in the last few months. Many airlines stopped lots of their flights. So are we at the end of the era of free flow of goods, services, and individuals as globalization is defined? Is there a future for globalization after the pandemic? What do you think?
Okay. I have a hard time talking about the future, really. I don't have so much to say about the future. I just don't know. But when I'm faced with questions like this, I usually try to look back into history and try to draw parallels. And in that way, perhaps you can learn something. So the way I think about globalization, as many others do too, of course, is in terms of exchange. So it's about economic markets, it's about trade of goods and services, but also, of course, many other things, ideas, projects, religion, culture, hopes, dreams. We're exchanging things on a global level. And this has tremendous impact. There are three examples of this. The first one I would like to mention goes all the way back to the 13th and 14th centuries. This is the time of the Mongol Empire. And the Mongol Empire, very few, 1 million people maybe in Mongolia, and they managed to connect by means of a very elaborate road network. They can connect China and India, the Middle East and Europe. And this is how incredible Chinese inventions travel: compasses, printing presses, paper making, gunpowder, many, many other things. And they hook up with Indian culture, and we get all these things from India, Indian mathematics and Muslim culture, and then to Europe. So everyone benefits greatly from this. The other example is from, well, 1492, really, the European connection with America. And you talk about the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange, of course, having to do with Columbus, right, Christopher Columbus, but it refers to the exchange of plants and animals that take place between the New World and the Old World. So we're getting potatoes, we're getting tomatoes. Can you imagine in Italy they had no tomatoes before 1492? In India, they had no chilies. They couldn't make a proper curry. We had no chocolate. And of course, we give to them, we give horses and cows and goats and sheep and coffee to Brazil, right? Brazilian gets coffee. The third example is what's happening now. This is the industrial era, and especially, of course, the last 30 years, when living standards have increased dramatically, and hundreds of millions of people have been taken out of poverty, and people who used to be desperately poor suddenly are having pretty decent lives. And this is all because of free trade, the global market. So I think globalization is great. I'm a great fan. I'm a great fan of exchange. Exchange allows you to leave your own little societies and to learn from other societies. You can broaden your horizons. You can escape your prejudices. You can get away from your set ways of thinking. Maybe it's because I'm from a stupid little country myself, only a few million people, very kind of closed off culture, very narrow-minded people. You grow as you leave this culture and you get into contact with other people. You develop your human potential. But it's not just products and ideas that we exchange, right? We exchange germs and viruses as well. And think about the Mongol Empire. We had the Black Death, we had the bubonic plague. They spread along the trade routes connecting China and India and Middle East and Europe. And something like maybe a third of the population died, half of the population died. There was widespread death in China, Middle East, and in Europe. And then after Columbus, the Columbian Exchange, it was not just plants and animals, it was also viruses and disease. So something like maybe 80% of the population of North America died because of smallpox and measles. 80%, unbelievable. And now, of course, we have the coronavirus, right? Today, we have a lot more knowledge, of course, and maybe the coronavirus is not as lethal as these previous illnesses, but still, I mean, we're in a position when millions and millions of people can die. So today we're in a situation where there's only very partial exchange. I mean, we're all exchanging on the internet so much, right? There's exchanges taking place there, but at the same time, we can't leave our buildings, we can't leave our houses. There's only very essential trade only. We're all locked up, we're stuck in our little worlds. It's a very strange thing for me as a foreigner in Turkey. I don't even know where I am. In what sense am I in Turkey? I mean, it's very unclear. Where am I? I just don't know. One problem I see here is that our version of the global market has focused very much on economic rationality, on what's profitable, and there's very little redundancy built into the system. We have no margins. For example, in the US, or everywhere in the Western world, there's no testing capacity. There are no hospital beds. There's nothing in addition to what's usually needed. So we have responded by providing resources that are enough to be economically rational, but not more. We only look at what can be justified in economic terms, and that's clearly not good enough. So we must do things somehow in a different way. And the question is how to do that. And it seems to me that what we need to do really is to look more at our own traditions, the traditions of our societies. And traditions are often very difficult to understand because often they just don't make sense. There's a lot of old traditions, and we're looking at these things and we're saying, what is this? Who cares about this? We don't know what this is. But very often traditions are, I would say, smarter than individuals. And the reason is that individuals, each one of us, we only know about our little world. And we don't know about what has been before, what has happened before. And we don't know about the future. But the traditions do, because the traditions have been around for a long, long time. And in a way, the traditions are more intelligent than we are as individuals. And I'll give you two examples of this, and then I'll stop. The first one is a little bit, a smaller example, let's say, and the other example is a little bit bigger. Now, in Denmark, a few years ago, they banned the wearing of burqa. It's illegal for women in Denmark to wear a burqa in public. And of course, today that makes no sense, right? Because everyone in Denmark is wearing face covering. So it seems to me that somehow the tradition knew something that individual lawmakers in Denmark didn't know. Muslim countries have gone through pandemics for hundreds of years. And somehow you can imagine that this is represented in the dress code. So a Danish person a few years ago would look at a burqa wearing Muslim woman and would say, oh, that's so strange. Why do they look like that? And why do they wear those kind of clothes? And today you know why they wear those kind of clothes, because you are wearing the same kind of clothes yourself. So the tradition is more intelligent than us individuals today. The other example has to do with neoliberalism and individualism. So we're relying on markets for everything. Everything in our societies has a price, but nothing really has a value. And we're thinking only about ourselves. Margaret Thatcher, British Prime Minister, she said, there is no such thing as a society. There are only individuals. So society has been very difficult to defend. And in a way, what is society, right? You look for society, where is it? All I see are a lot of individuals. Perhaps Thatcher was right. Perhaps there is no society. No, tradition tells us there is a society. There's always been a society. And society is right here. We see it before ourselves today, right? Because there is no individual solution to the pandemic. All the solutions to the pandemic presuppose that we work together because viruses are contagious. There's no vaccine and there's no medicine. You can't help yourself. We have to help each other. And we do this by staying at home, by looking after ourselves, and also by protecting others when we go outside. There's no other way. Not even the richest person can protect him or herself. There is no protection except the protection that we engage in together. So what is this? It's society. It's right here. It's right before us. And I think this is very problematic, for example, in the US, where people still to this day are insisting on what they call their individual rights. And they're saying that individual rights are more important than society. And I think this is just wrong. They are just wrong. Society is more important than the individual. And this is proven by the fact that this is our only way to protect ourselves, to be together and to save each other. So what I can see is we have to restart the exchange. The exchange is extremely important. We can't lock ourselves into our little worlds, but we must also become a lot smarter about the way we exchange. We must listen to our traditions, and the traditions is where we can get good advice. Our traditions can protect us, maybe actually even from viruses. You know, we all dress up in burqa, and we'll be much better off. They provide. It's all about cloth, right? Cloth covering. And I think it can also protect us from things like neoliberalism and individualism, because those were terrible mistakes that mankind cannot afford. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erik Hocam. In a time when all political scientists and international relations experts are talking about the future of pandemic, I think it was very useful to remind us the history of pandemic and the past experiences. And when you were talking about that the current capitalist society is very much relying on small margins on the market, this was also reminded me that one of the claims of modern capitalism is that it solved the scarcity problem in economies. But on the one hand, it has the capacity to solve scarcity problems. On the other, since it was not economically rational to provide all of the things that you can produce, you do not produce or you do not sell, so that we just live on the margins, on small margins. And finally, I very much, I think, I mean, your emphasis on the relation between traditional ways of living and the claim of modern men about, and women, of course, about the way they should live in is very, very useful. We need to keep these in mind, and we will, I think, come back to this in our Q&A session. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would like to continue with Dr. Heba Raouf, and with another aspect of the crisis. Heba Hocam, I think another aspect of the pandemic is about the state capacities and state responses. So as one of the classical definitions of the state is related to their war-making capacity. So what is the relation, you think, between war, state, the war on virus? So did a virus disarm the states? What do you think?
Well, I've been following the news, and I've been trying to figure out where we are heading. And of course, we have different approaches and different imaginations. I mean, the imagination of a political theorist is different from someone who is a strategist, from someone who is an international relations expert. So I'm coming from the political theory background, and I always watch the state very carefully, how states react, how states respond to challenges in a way. And for the last few weeks, actually, I have noticed some things. So I'm not like predicting or giving concrete scenarios for the future. I'm just trying to share what I have noticed so far. Of course, we know that the sovereignty is very much based on the notion of protection of the territory. So sovereignty and territoriality are very much linked to each other, but also capitalism and temporality are linked to each other, because time is basically colonialized. It's basically distributed along the lines of production, and people are convinced that the sphere where they are working and producing is limited to specific times, etc. Many things have changed since the pandemic started, and we had to turn to experts. Not in this case the politicians, not even academics like ourselves. Everyone is turning his face to the doctors, basically. Looking at the WHO head became much more important than the head of the UN, you know, so Secretary General of the UN. Everyone is following the statistics all day long, in which country, what happened, the rise and the curve, and flattening the curve, and herds immunity, and all these new terms that we didn't know before or were not very familiar with. So I think that what we are facing now, right from the outstart, was a very straightforward challenge to the ability of the state to promote its basic role to protect. Because when you have a concrete enemy, then you can launch wars. You can accuse your even enemies, if they are like militias or ISIS or even political opposition, sometimes in the third world country, of being terrorists, you know, of being a threat, and you can legitimize acting accordingly, using and launching wars and using military tactics. But what are you going to do in a war on the virus? I mean, so this is a new situation where people feel extremely afraid, extremely vulnerable, and the state as a state, what would it do? I mean, if you bring the army to the streets to maintain order, it will not actually affect very much the pandemic's threat. So here is a dilemma. The people wake up in the morning and realize that no matter how powerful you are, like the United States, for example, if you don't have a very strong health system, if you don't have policies, basically, that protect people, if you don't have policies of education that have been preparing people and have been preparing systems for the shift towards online teaching, for example, you basically are facing dilemmas. And having such a great army will not help you much. Of course, it will help you on other sides, but not in this situation. So I think that the first few weeks we witnessed that the doctors stand in front of presidents, stand in front of leaders in the different press conferences and statements addressed to the nation, etc. Doctors were there all the time. Everyone is addressing them. Two things happened actually in the second month of the pandemic, which is that presidents are trying to show again, to show up on the scene again, and to confirm that they are going to fight the virus. We're going to win over the threat, you know, as if they are facing a direct enemy that everyone can see, because they realize that if they give in to the experts, if they give in to different sectors in society, like scientists, for example, it would basically undermine the grip of the political on the minds of people. A second thing is that actually there is so much going on, though people have to stay at home, in terms of civil society, donations, attempts to even let the copyrights open, and the protocols and the production sort of procedures open to everyone. A big company that is responsible for producing ventilators open the technology that it has to everyone to copy and imitate and reproduce in their own respective countries, because I mean, if the world is over, nobody will benefit. The market will fall anyway. And others made the technology of the 3D printing for masks also available. So you witness also a reaction of civil society and global civil society in return. But also on the other hand, you'll find that now there is a militarization of the discourse regarding the virus. You're talking about war on the virus. This is a war we will win. We will win over the virus. I mean, you'll find it in different media outlets and platforms. So this is very striking. Can armies win a war on virus. This is a thing that we have to think about. And I think that it would result eventually, which might be good news for some nations, it will be a must basically to direct a lot of funding to scientific research, to education, to national health systems, because it's very obvious what happened. Obama tried to push a bit towards this direction. Trump came and completely spoiled the whole thing. And now he's saying, I mean, 5 years ago, nobody could have anticipated. Actually, Obama anticipated, and he said it, and others like Bill Gates anticipated, and many warnings were there, but nobody listens because the search for power, the search for monopoly, the search for the boosting of sovereignty and expanding your influence globally was taking priority. And I think that this war against the virus will actually have a lot of implications on redefining war and redefining sovereignty. We have now 3 emerging spheres that are very important to follow. And I'm trying to follow them as much as I can. First is the virus sphere. We go to different readings now and books, and sometimes I ask my students to have a look at such writings written basically by doctors or by hygiene experts. I can give the example of 2 books. One book is titled The Virus Sphere, and another, The Rules of the Contagion, why things spread and why they stop. This was published 2020, so probably at the very beginning of the pandemic, someone made the effort to sit and write something about how things spread, and not only what spreads is virus, but also panic, fear, different attitudes in society, consumerism, this consumerism of fear, people running to grab things because they don't know whether there will be a lockdown, and they can find what they need in their kitchens and fridges, etc. So this is the virus sphere and its impact on markets. But also we have the biosphere. The state, when it tells people by law in all the countries, it managed to, of course, this is essential to fight the virus, but at the same time, it's also very much related to the sovereignty of the state. This biopolitical approach to the new situation that you have to stay at home. And I was reminded by the discourse of many governments, especially in the Middle East and in the third world, accusing those who go out because they cannot afford to stay at home of being basically ignorant, of being uncivil, of being savage, you know, as if you break the law, it's not about that. It's about you did not provide those people with the necessary means to survive during the lockdown. And they have to go out and find a way to feed their families. And of course, the more you go to the south, in the south sphere of the world, the more this is an issue. So I've been also following the discourse accusing those who do not have by those who do have, you know, of being ignorant and savage and going out, and you're going to make things even worse regarding the virus and the pandemic. Okay, where were your economic, just and egalitarian policies to prepare for such a moment that have been anticipated actually by scientists, by some decision makers, even by historians? Nobody listened to historians, you know, when they said that germs and weapons, the changes and shifts in the invention and in the knowledge can actually affect our history and can make a change. So the virus sphere, the biosphere, and of course a lot of philosophy has been also showing on the scene. Agamben wrote something, others replied, Zizek replied. You know, we have also a philosophical debate regarding the state of exception, how far the states will benefit from that, to basically control people more by making them sit in their homes for a longer time to make other arrangements. Of course, if you ask someone to go now for a demonstration asking for more human rights, more democracy in any country, this is not a priority anymore. So this is like a good moment for people to hold governments accountable, but also for governments to get away with so many things under this state of exception. So the war on the virus can have the same outcomes or impacts like the war on terrorism, because it can be used basically by states to enlarge their hegemony over the people. The third sphere is actually the ecosphere. it will not be a trivial matter when we, inshallah, come out of that crisis, the whole of humanity, that people more and more will realize that the ecosphere is very important, and that the environmental issues are actually important as well. So the virusphere and the ecosphere will gain more interest by a majority of people. Of course, when we talk about the lockdown, we also are talking about, or the quarantine, or whatever you call it, we're also talking about urban spaces. And this reminds me of Zygmunt Bauman's work and Saskia Sassen and others, sociologists, regarding urban wars. So how is the city going to be reshaped? The city witnessed in the last decades militarization. So we have cities under siege, we have cities, rebel cities, and all these are names of academic works by different sociologists and urban sociologists. So watch the urban, because the urban will be the theater, the platform for a lot of changes in the coming months. And depending on how far the government can control and win in these urban wars, will affect definitely all the struggles for justice and equality on the long term. When we teach theory of the state, we start with the formation of the state, and we remember the work of Charles Tilly when he said that the state making is actually organized crime. And he has a very interesting theory on that, because it entails a lot of violence to establish a state, but it also entails a lot of violence to continue. And armies have been sort of trying to move in that direction. We are not forgetting that the NATO has got its own also scientific and research arm. So it's not only about the military alliances, it's also about research, it's also about promoting specific ideas and reaching out to academics. So how the war would shift, how the military tactics, how the language of the militarization of language. We are all soldiers for the sake of the country. Even in a case that is very interesting and close to me because I'm following closely. In Egypt now they call the doctors the White Army. So it's like, why should we call the doctors the White Army? I mean, why militarize the language of how to fight a virus and make the military present in everything that we do? So also how we describe, and this panic and its outcomes. I think that this situation of spreading fear and trying to control and trying to make use of the sovereignty as a shield and protector will witness substantial qualitative changes. And it's not just business as usual for sovereignty, the state and armies. I think that we have to keep a close look at what is going on now, because it will have an impact on how people need to think in the future about political dissent, about struggles, whether in the economic or the socio-economic spheres, and how armies actually, and this is my fear, that the armies will invent new wars in order to prove that they have a role to play, and hence keep dominating and keep getting from the budget of the state the share that is completely obscure for accountability and transparency. So I think that approaching the pandemic situation globally from the approach of war as a war will highlight some of the challenges we are facing now regarding human will, human freedom, let alone the technosphere, which is the fourth sphere, which is not only about violating privacy of people and collecting information, trying to find out your location so that you can be controlled, and we can control the spread of the pandemic by knowing who you contacted with if you are testing positive, but also data mining. Our Zoom itself has been in some instances hacked and penetrated, and there is evidence that some of our data has been leaking to China. And while Macron came out 2 days ago calling for international truce, for global truce, to stop wars and to stop violence, and to give opportunity for governments to deal with the matter of the pandemic. Some of the voices in the United States actually were calling for more armament in the Pacific against China. So as a war globally, war as a discourse and as a paradigm for the state inside, I think is one of the aspects that should be noticed and looked at during this crisis. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heba. Really insightful comments from a political theory perspective. I think we will deal with the points you touch upon more in Q&A session. But the last sentences you mentioned is a good connection with our next speaker, Professor Wahabuddin Raess. Wahabuddin Hocam, Heba Hoca ended his talk with the comments on the power transition or the rivalry between East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the West. So my question is, will the pandemic affect great power politics? So while the problem seems primarily related to health, the world leaders are associating the virus predominantly with China. Trump is using repeatedly the phrase Chinese virus to refer to corona, for example. Similarly, other leaders said Chinese government concealed information, thus misled the world. Even some said that the Chinese should pay the price. So how will the pandemic shape great power politics? What do you think?
Thank you very much. And when we look at these type of events that are happening in the international system, we need to look at actually the nature of the international system. And we need to look at the issues of cooperation, stability, from the context and vantage point view of great power relationship. In other words, anything happens in the world, it is not the making of small countries or 200 countries, they come together and they will be sitting together and in the United Nations or somewhere in the sitting, but it's actually those very few states which are very powerful, what we call them great powers. These are the ones that who basically make the decisions in the development, in the creation, in the ordering, in the management of a specific international scenario and is international happening, like what happened, the corona. But let me just check, take you back to the days before corona, or maybe even until today, and they currently, what type of international system that existed, which will define the connection between the states who are basically considered to be the stakeholder. Is it an international system that existed where that all these states, which we call them great powers like China, Russia, for that matter, France or Britain or Germany and the United States, basically it is something that they were all sharing this cake and it is something made by all of them, or it is actually the making of one and the others are basically the beneficiary. And therefore, if you look at the history of this, the very short history, maybe if you just put a glance through, maybe from even World War II onward, it is, or maybe from World War I to World War II, it is a system which basically, I think it is mainly argued that that is the system which was created by the West and led by the United States. So in a way, one would assume and one would believe that this is a system which is basically created by the Americans. It's an American-dominated system where Joseph Nye calls this system a kind of liberal international order, international system. Now, in this system, if you look at all the institutions, the structures, economic, political, social, whatever it is, then it is created by the one who have manufactured it. So the manufacturers, the United States, and the United States have created it. From IMF to World Bank to United Nations to human rights and to so in everything the United States, for right reason or wrong reasons, was dominant. And most of the time, certain good things in this system have been used in order to promote the American agenda. So therefore, it is a system, it was a system which is basically created by the US, and US is basically claiming a credit for this. I'm just talking about the American system. I'm not talking basically about one administration in the US. And that administration, which is the current administration of President Trump. So President Trump is one thing, but to say the American agenda is different, whether it is a Democrat or it is Republican. So in the middle of these Republicans, you get one person, a businessman, who tries to dismantle everything for his own purpose and try to promote his business in a way. That is how the Trump administration is accused. Now, you have a system which you will find dominated by the US. And US always has tried to find who challenges this system. In other words, if you want to see who are the adversaries to this system, who would plan for destruction of this system, you would find immediately, you will find the Soviet Union. Later, you would find terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and you would find its latest version was China. So you're having, China is now coming up too, and then you have the post-Soviet Russia. So you're seeing that these are the ones, for one reason or the other reason, the United States would ensure that, therefore, is my system and these are the threat. Now, in order to say that this system is being transformed, or in other words, any one of these powers, whether ideologically, whether politically, whether militarily or economically, they must move into the center. And moving to the center means they should be able to really control and have control over those structures and institutional basis of the international system. So if we are going to say China, Russia, for that matter, or someone else is replacing the United States, then we should look at it in terms of the abilities in terms of controlling and having a greater influence in the institutional basis of the international system. It is like two political parties, they're running for elections, and both of them say, I'm victorious, but one of them is having control over the state institutions of the judiciary, executive, legislature. Then the other one is outside. So which one is more powerful? The one who is really controlling the institutions. The same thing, anyone who is in the driving seat of these institutions, then will be the dominant player. Would anyone else would replace it? There will be challengers. Yes, the challenges would be getting greater, would be bigger, and sometimes challenges will be suppressed, but challenges would always be there, and it will be watchful of those challenges. So now you have a system in which the United States is dominating, and the United States is controlling, and the United States is reinventing, and the United States had and basically is comparatively to speak on hard or soft terms, the United States comparatively more capable than others, economically, militarily, technologically, and in terms of, if you would like to put it, even though the values they don't promote what they say, but still the values that they have and they advocate or somehow propagate, sometimes they're comparatively a little bit attractive than the one which, let's say, exists in China or Russia for that matter. So if you're taking this, so now comes in the issue, an event happens, that is what we call it, the COVID-19, Corona happened. Now, how so who should take care of this problem? And you could see that there is, so if I go back a little bit, I leave China, I leave Russia, I leave others, but I would just focus a little bit on the US-China relationship. Yes, China is considered to be a challenger, and China is now leading, and China, this is what we are reading in the newspaper, and China is going to take over, and the next day that it is a kind of wrestling game in which that the United States is going to be defeated the next day, and the championship is going to be handed over to China. I think these are a little bit simplification that most of the time we do. Yes, definitely. Corona comes. You will see first there are some kind of missteps, if I put it this way. There are mistakes by both China as well as the. But keeping in mind, United States is in control and in a driving seat, and it is controlling the state institution, international system institutions, whereby China is struggling to penetrate. Even in what you call World Trade Organization, it took them, so still China has yet to have this. But what China was doing in the beginning, hiding. China was hiding, no one knew about it. And finally, when they felt, and then what China did was it started to blame the United States for a military lab and things, So I think the assumption was that probably it is something very limited, temporary, territorial, and it may not be something which will be spreading to the rest. And therefore, we will just use this, and that will give us a kind of credibility in the eyes of the international community. And they say that the US is now trying to destroy China. This is one version, but it went out of control. And it is not only a Chinese problem, it was something that we just spread to the rest of the world. So what to do? And then expected was that the United States should come in and should save in a way. But you have in the United States a president who is much more interested in his own business rather than in humanity and its own people and its own citizens. And even today, until now, he's trying to open the market despite the fact that they need to be protected. So he would like to promote his business. But maybe if it would be another American president, probably as soon as they hear, or maybe some intelligence information comes to them, they might have rallied the international community and somehow even engage China and others to come have a collective response. And that would have been an opportunity for this leadership to become even stronger. So you will find China as well as you will find the United States, both of them had missteps. But now, China had in the beginning, but later China came in and started to distribute the goodies and this and that to those people, and give them the masks and those things. Now, yes, China is becoming a little bit popular. People are receiving, but does that mean that China is really taking over and defeating, and in the wrestling game, another power, and basically? Yeah, it shows that China is getting stronger. China influence is increasing, but would it really control the international system? This would all depend back to go that what the United States basically controls, would China take over and control those things? If not, would China be able to develop parallel institutions, which will be basically challenging economic, military? What you have today, you are seeing the NATO. Ministers yesterday were saying that NATO is still relevant. So they would be talking about the relevancy of those type of institutions, that still Afghanistan is not a secure place, still Iraq is not a secure place, still terrorism is an issue, still Daesh is a problem. So it is just to ensure that it is justifying the existence of this type of institutions, which are basically American dominated. I'm not saying Trump dominated, but I'm talking about American dominated. Now, Trump does a lot of damage to this. So you will find the clash between the China and the United States on that level, where both of them have difficulties, but the leadership is in the hands of and China is getting greater influence, but it looks like is not capable to penetrate into the system. and it is not capable to basically even those people who have received help from China. And still, if you offer them the option between the American system, what America would give them and what China would give them, I think even the Pew polling survey, opinion poll, others, they show that still they would go for the American system, because at least there's a little bit of transparency, relax, it is not such controlled. And so you have this kind of system. Now, what the American rebound to rebuild back the system, I would say it would depend on who will be in next year by the end of the year in the White House. Who would be? If it is Trump, I think damage will be done more. But I would say, even if, let's say, if it will be Trump's second term and it will be any other Republican instead of Democrat, they would be different from what Trump is doing, because those are the ones that would come in, they would have American interests at least, but not their own personal business interest in the picture. So it will very much depend on who the American would be. But I think gradually things will move. Maybe I will add a few, 2-3 more. Now,
maybe we can, Hocam, continue at Q&A session if you like.
Just give me another 2 minutes. I will just get back, because this is something now. Whatever it is will be the scenario. I would still say the United States will be in control, but then China is becoming more influential in the system. But it will take time. It will take for the elephant is dead, probably, if you say, but even to bury an elephant, it will take time. Because it's huge. It's not a chicken that you can easily bury it, or it's not a cat, something that you can just. Now, what happens is, this Cronat suggests to me this. I think another complex. We have this military-industrial complex which took over after the war, after the wars, and basically is dominating the foreign policies. But I think the great power relationship will be greatly influenced by the R&D in the pharmaceutical and in the healthcare system. So I would call it that our pharmaceutical industrial complexes in the making, where all governments will be pouring money into drug-related issues, and they would be basically used maybe for whatever purpose, in terms of sale, in terms of other things. And you wouldn't know, even sometimes I do suspect that why Bush and others were basically promoting this, because there were people who were advising them that this is a big industry that you can go in. But had it not been maybe terrorism and other things would distracted them, the Fauci and other things opinion would have probably materialized. And maybe they say, oh, we have succeeded to create vaccine and others, but actually it is a big business. So what will happen is that this will be, the healthcare system will go to the hands of these big businesses, and that is going to cascade down and will affect individuals in every state. So therefore, if you would like to go and have maybe a driving license, have you had your this check or that check, and you have to pay for this, because there will be a lot of businesses will be working for this. So you will have, I would say there will be a very strong industrial, pharmaceutical industrial complex will be emerging.
Thank you.
And the last point is that I think the coronavirus tracking system and tracing of the individuals that who have been meeting and those things, it is giving the states a greater control over the freedoms, movements of individuals. And the great powers in relationship with the center in the periphery, in the peripheral countries, would be able to use these states to track down all types of people that they feel that whether economically or they are in some way, the businesses that will challenge and threaten them, they will bring them under different names and try to track them. So in a way, these were just a few speculations that I had, but these are nothing in a way I would say is very much based on proper research. So it would require more research to really verify these things, how it would happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wahabuddin Hocam. There are many questions coming from our participants, those who listened to your talks. I don't know whether we will have time to address these all because it's already 10 past 10. So what I will do is I will try to read the questions quickly, and I will try to mention to whom it is directed if it is written in the question. And then we'll do a second round of just answers. But my kindly request is please try to keep your answers as brief as possible. So let me start. I'm reading a few questions. One of the questions is from Enis. He is asking that, given Daran Acemoğlu's argument that institutions are instrumental in creating inclusive political systems and institutions, is there a likely scenario to have rise in exclusive institutions? And specifically, he means that as after the Great Depression, we saw the rise of fascism, Nazism in Europe. Should we expect to see something like this after? Because I think many of the economists expect an economic recession in the next 2-3 quarters of the year. So should we expect the rise of such new institutions or ideologies? Another question is from Nejem. He asks, there's an exacerbation of inequality and unbalanced power relations. Will there be, the result of the pandemic will be a rise of inequality or a more equal and harmonious world? Talha Hocam answered this question a little bit, and he said there will be an increase in unbalance, but if anyone would like to comment on this, you are more than welcome. Lina has 2 questions. One is about, to Heba Hocam specifically. So she says, we have seen with state capacity fading in the pandemic, some mafia or big drug dealers stepping in to win the poor people, distributing aid for them. So what are the dimensions and repercussions of such a phenomenon? The second question of Lina is to Erik Hocam. So in the epicenters of the pandemic, she says, we witnessed and heard stories about how the choice was made about who to live and who to die. Unfortunately, in some regions, it was made based on the productivity. So save the younger and kill the older. Still, the productivity is the engine. And in times like these, it doesn't make sense that much. So will this be stronger, our focus on productivity, or our culture of productivity, or is it gonna change? Do you have any expectations regarding to this? Last few questions I would like to read. There is one question from Önder Hocam. Önder Hoca asks to Heba Hoca. Heba Hocam, how would you reflect upon the tension between ecosphere and the econosphere, economics, I guess, under the tutelage of virus sphere? So how should we arrange our housekeeping relations after the virus? I think this is more like an article. We need to write an article about an answer, but I believe in your capacity to answer in a few sentences. Another question from Safa. She says, she makes reference to Foucauldian and Agamben's understanding of state of exception and how states use these states of exception to create situations in their favor. So the question is, how should we understand in what way the governments may continue to take advantage of this ability to use the power after the pandemic? A question from Muaz to Talha Hoca specifically. What is the Turkish view or Turkey's view after Corona, especially after President Erdogan's statement that the world will not be the same as before? So does Turkey have a view on the world, an official view maybe? Another question from Rami, can we say that the health system will become part of the national security system in each state in the future? So it's again related with the war on terror probably. And there are some more questions. And last one, I will read the last one from Risky. So the question is, we talk a lot about the connection between the pandemic and society. The liberal values are declining, etc. But looking at the responses of some countries, especially in Europe, despite that they are part of the European integration, European Union, there is no help and solidarity on the surface. So is it even likely that after the crisis, states will realize the ineffectiveness of integration and be more self-centered? So maybe it can be related to our discussion on globalization. Although Erik Hocam talked more about the history, so can we make a prediction about European integration as well, or anybody from the panelists? So there are many other questions, but we don't have that time. So I would like to start with Talha Hocam first, the questions you would like to answer, but if we can keep like 3 minutes,
okay,
I will be very happy. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. I mean, Turkey's view is very clear. From the beginning, taking necessary measures and trying to convince society was actually the dominant domestic perspective. Whereas internationally, providing support, increasing the solidarity and cooperation, especially with allies and with the countries we have ties, was very important. So I think this new idea of solidarity and trying to address the problems with cooperation and coordination was the ideal Turkey tried to promote. So Turkey's capabilities are limited. However, despite all these limitations, Turkey tried to promote this kind of help with the expectation that the other countries, when they're in a better situation, will also help the others. So I think that was a clear message which found positive also response from World Health Organization. And I think that's a kind of new world, less competitive. We are all human beings and we have shared interests, we have shared I think vulnerabilities, and we have to address those with cooperation. So that was Turkey's message. And for the, I think these institutions and for the new shape of the politics, I think usually people, try to make comparisons between the liberal politics and authoritarianism. Usually there's a binary opposition. So they say that because the liberal economies, politics failed to address this problem, the authoritarian systems will be more popular in the coming years. The state will be strengthened. I don't agree with this. I think there is a middle ground which may be even as dangerous as the authoritarianism. There is an increasing the rise of professionalization, rise of the oligarchies that are controlling societies. So I think the new professional groups, elites, especially were successful, functional in Korea, Hong Kong, Japan. So I think this new, the rise of new exclusive knowledge elites may be predominant. I mean, I think the politics still is a domain that ordinary people may engage, may have their influence, may have their say, either in liberal form or authoritarian form. I think the increasing new knowledge competition, knowledge elite, may be also a new trend, which will make this technocratic regimes more popular in the future, which may also recreate new groups, new societies in the future. So I think there may be more technocratic tendencies which may reduce the domain and autonomy of the politics. And I think the politicians and people may also respond to this. But in times of this kind of crisis, I think, and in the period where we are heading towards and knowledge society, competition over technology and knowledge, this may be the predominant theme, and this will continue to, compete with liberals as well as authoritarians. I think that's a tendency, and strong institutions may also help their predomination in the system. I think this may be a challenging task. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I will go in the order of the speakers. So next to Erik Hocam. Would you like to comment on any of the questions? And you have just 3 minutes, please.
Okay. Yeah, there's a question from Lina about the role of economic rationality in future society. Clearly in the US, there are people today who feel that we should sacrifice ourselves for the economy, and if old people die, that's okay, as long as the economy is healthy and robust. Now, I think this highlights the issue of whether the economy works for us or whether we should work for the economy. And I think this discussion has been settled. I think the virus settled that discussion, because it's no longer a matter of arguments and points of view. It's a matter of survival. And there's only one way to survive here, and that is that we help each other. And from that perspective, economic rationality will not mean very much. And it's actually very interesting about the US. I mean, to people who pursue this neoliberal, individualistic way of thinking in America could create real problems, wreak havoc. And America can have tremendous problems in the future. In a way, it's a question of listening to the virus, right? It's telling us something. And these are things that we know, because we should know, because it has been part of our own traditions. Our tradition knows about this already, so we need to return to that, and that's our only way to save ourselves. There's no individualistic solution, it seems to me. Yeah, Risky had just a question about the European Union. This is very problematic, of course, if the European Union breaks down and if people stop cooperating across borders. And this is not just a question of the European Union, it's a question of world politics in general. And for the same reason, really, I mean, it's not just that we have individual societies. Mankind, womankind, humankind has also revealed itself to exist, right? It's in a way, it's like a sci-fi movie. We have this invasion of Martians, people coming from a different planet. It's a kind of being from a different planet, and mankind, humankind, suddenly unites against this external threat. And we come together, we realize that we really are, one. And if we don't realize that, it's very problematic. Now, one smaller point maybe, but very interesting, it seems to me, there's obvious lack of leadership, and we're suffering greatly from this American indulgence to elect this person as president. It's bad enough if it hurts Americans, but now it's hurting all of us, and that's a disaster. But some people have stepped up, and it's really interesting to me that they tend to be women. In Germany, Angela Merkel is doing a great job. In New Zealand, Ardern is doing a great job. In Taiwan, we have Tsai Ing-wen, female president, and she's doing an incredibly good job. And it's an interesting question, right? Why is it that women are better at dealing with this? Maybe women are more caring. Maybe men are more risk-taking. There's a risk-taker in the White House. There's another risk-taker in London, right? These are dangerous people. It's interesting to compare, for example, with the financial crisis 2008, when these young men were gambling with our future and betting on a roulette and losing, right? And the argument then was Christine Lagarde, who now is head of the European Central Bank, she made this argument that if women had been in charge in 2008, there would never have been an international financial crisis. And it seems to me you can say the same thing now. So maybe that's a lesson for the future. Vote in more female leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik Hocam, for the concise answer. So I will go with Heba Hocam right now. And again, just 3 minutes, please.
Okay, I will do my best. Very hard. First, I disagree regarding women's issue. I think that the systems were giving more attention to healthcare and had a very strong crisis management groups and were very responsive to the needs of the to fight the pandemic at the beginning are the ones who won. And I don't think masculinity and femininity matters really. I think that it's about capabilities. So first of all, I want to just to say something that might be framing my answers that I will go through hopefully very quickly, which is that I personally, because I'm not an international relations researcher or academic, I think that there is a lot of disorder innate in the system, and it's not a system. It's like the realm, because I'm not fooled really by insisting on calling what we live in globally as a system. I think there are different systems, and these systems enjoy a high degree of anarchy. And yeah, this is something that even theories of international relations have been disagreeing on. But even if we agree to the notion of the system, then there are so many systems, and it's very complex. So complexity is what we are describing. And I also think that because we are in a in an environment, cultural and academic environment, that basically comes from a specific worldview, which is not something that we should be ashamed of or anything. I mean, on the contrary. So I would like to introduce before we leave, if this is going to be recorded, Yani, for students to look at later, etc. Instead of the notion of the world order, I think that the virus should drive us to think again about the notion of Nizam al-Alam, the world as an order. You know, so it's not the world order in terms of international relations and states, but the order of the world as created. So because the imbalances in this order, including the ecosphere and the biosphere, is actually what we are facing. And pandemics just remind us, you know, we are facing problems all through, but pandemics are a good opportunity to revise this Nizam al-Alam, and how do we look at this sort of order of the world in a way, including religion and culture and other things that have nothing to do with markets and power and sovereignty. I think that fascism, responding to one question, fascism will not find a good argument in the coming months and years, and the lockdown of the shutdown of borders will not continue, simply because so many experts who managed to help European countries in facing the pandemic were actually from outside. Yani, I heard, I'm not sure because the media cannot all the time be trusted, but one of the doctors who basically cured, who were working in the hospital where Boris Johnson was hospitalized, was an Egyptian. And we had 5 Arabs, senior doctors who passed away because they caught the pandemic while practicing their work. So I think that also the news coming from Spain indicates that because of the pandemic, there will be no possible move of the seasonal workers from North Africa to work in the agricultural sector in Spain. And hence there is now a consideration that the Spaniards need actually to go to the fields and pick their own crops, because it's like nobody's there because the borders are closed. So it will show that we cannot live actually separated from each other. There is such an interconnectedness, and it's not only on the very worker labor level, but it's also on experts level. And the United States is just an example. We will not have fascism, but we will have by the state and by the regimes an attempt to create enemies. And it was very striking that in the middle of that, instead of just accusing, which is bad enough, just accusing China from afar that it contributed to this pandemic, the United States has announced that is basically accusing 3 Chinese researchers in the United States of being spies. So this is like a new McCarthyian wave as well. The Chinese will be considered to be enemies, and they will be demonized inside the country, which was very striking. In the middle of everything, there came a person with an official statement. We arrested 3 researchers, Chinese researchers in the United States, and they claim that they were spies. So this is something that is, but massive fascism will face challenges because of the complexity of the relations. Regarding the the mafias and how the mafias are trying to help poor families, etc. Well, let's remember that in Bosnia, the first militias that started fighting against the Serbian attacks on different cities were basically the outlaws of these cities, because they were the ones who could deal with guns. The others were civilians. They were tamed by the government and by the state, and the only ones who could manage to fight and knew how to use arms were basically the thugs. So this was the first front of the groups that basically started defending the cities and the villages in Bosnia. So good and evil are a very long issue, yani a very profound thing to think about. And I think that mafias also have their affiliation with local communities, and at time of pandemic, they start working on that. Ibn Khaldun reminds us all the time that human beings bounce between savagery and humanity. So it's like this is for me very normal. The question of Safa, the society, how would the society react, and would we face more and more curbing of the human element and agency in the public and social sphere? I think we will see even more awareness of the importance of defending people's rights, because the governments and the notion of the state is regarding protecting us from the war of all against all, according to Hobbes. And now, if the governments cannot protect us and the viruses can come and kill us all, then there is a notion of social solidarity that will emerge, a notion of vulnerability and a sense of being that actually wants to reach out to people. And it's very interesting that at the very moment where we are kept outside the public sphere because of health reasons, people are now, some of them are becoming more violent at home. So domestic violence is increasing in some societies, but also at the same time, a lot of initiatives for home education, a lot of initiatives for counseling, a lot of initiatives for reaching out to people. I mean, for the first time in my family, they are making a family Zoom conference now to bring together everyone who is outside the country, which we always had the Zoom. We never thought about it. We were fine with the WhatsApp group, with all the family of all the different generations is on the WhatsApp group, something like 45 people, you know, my cousins and the nephews and nieces, etc. And now they are calling today for a Zoom meeting, which is great. I mean, it's gonna bring some people also together. So the situation is very complex, and complexity, again, is a word that I like to use. I will not say chaotic, because chaos has a very bad reputation. But chaos is also about emerging new patterns of relations, of power relations, of social relations. And we are in the middle of that. And that's why I'm keeping a very close eye at how the states react. It's not about the regime after World War I. It's about the Westphalian regime. And if it is now witnessing a substantial change and we are in the middle of it, we will not be able to see it clearly till it changes completely and we look back and see what happened. But in between, I think there is a lot that is being changed now, and we just have to look at the spheres that we give more attention than the common power spheres only.
Okay, thank you very much, Bahjam. And last speaker will be Wahabuddin Raess. Wahabuddin Hocam, would you like to answer any of the questions within
very
just
quickly, I think this
very quickly, 3 minutes, please.
Even I will maybe to the issue of equality. I think we will be suffering from this problem of inequality. I don't see that there will be any attempt. Still, there will be individuals who would try to dominate and control and benefit from the situations at the cost of others. So therefore, I'm not sure to what extent we might be basically moving towards a little bit of egalitarian lifestyle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this will be the end of our program on world politics and coronavirus. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Dr. Talha Köse, Erik Ringmar,
Okay.
Heba, Raouf, and Wahabuddin Raess. It was a very useful and insightful night for me. We tried to discuss the current situation from different angles, from political science, from international relations, political theory and philosophy, from great power politics. We go back to history and try to predict the future. So it was full of food for thought. I would like to thank you for all, and I would like to thank our participants, our listeners who contributed to our discussions with their questions. I am sorry that I couldn't ask and direct all of your questions to our panelists, because I mean, there were many questions. I tried to pick some, and it has been like 1.5 hour program. So I would like to end the program here, and thank you very much for your participation and contribution.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Enes.
Thank
You're
you.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much for
Thank
I
Thank
miss
you.
you,
Have a
Enes.
good night.
I miss
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Oh, no.